Thanks for tuning in. So yes, today I want to talk a little bit about our atheism, or more to the point, the atheist. So I'm all about popping the Man Delusion and the atheist delusion. I mean, when you listen to the likes of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris and so on, their ilk, debunking the God stories, the God fables, I mean, it's easy to applaud them because they do it with a lot of wit and intellectualism. But you know, it's no bother pop delusional bubbles. You know, any thinking 10-year-old child can debunk the God notions. If the God notion is about heaven and hell and demons in hell and, you know, angels flying around in heaven and 50 virgins up in heaven and so on and all of that nonsense, it's no bother debunk that. So as much as I applaud them for debunking all this delusional nonsense, the God story doesn't stop there. And I don't believe they understand the field itself. To enter the field of what God might be, one has to enter the field of phenomenology. One has to understand how the mind is plugged into reality and how the mind is actually seeing things systemically. So yes, the Man Delusion. My goal was to systemize the human mind. I don't know, I was fascinated with that idea for many, many years, and I went about trying to systemize the human mind, and I believe to a degree that I have. And if you've been listening to my streams, well, hopefully you've heard me give agency to the mind in a systemic manner, to show that I know what I'm talking about in relation to the mind being systemic. My goal was to systemize the mind, but by in systemizing the mind, new doors opened up in my mind, new doors, new ways, new volume, new dimensions opened up in my mind, and how I viewed reality. My perspective shifted, and naturally so. The more you go down the rabbit hole, the more the rabbit hole opens up to you, if you can go down it in the right way. One has to go down it in a structured manner to understand it. So this all-seeing systemic eye, let's talk about that. I mean, I've talked about it many times, and to engage with me right now, you've engaged a systemic lens. It's a universal lens. It's very important that you understand that. It's a universal lens built on universals, meaning it is in everybody. One engine, one systemic lens, one systemic all-seeing observational systemic eye in everyone. So what is this all-seeing systemic lens that is within us? And more importantly, how powerful is it? Well, that's one way of measuring what God might be for me. And this is one of the doors the system opened up to me. And this is where the atheists have to go if they want to truly debunk God, because the God story, as I've said, is not over. Just because you've popped delusional bubbles doesn't mean the God story ends on that page. I mean, that's just arrogance, from a man that cannot predicate himself or herself. Okay, so anyway, how powerful is the all-seeing eye? Well, the eye is built with a set, its agency is understood through a set of systemic utility modes, utility mechanisms of the mind. And when we go into these modes, I see them as superpowers. I mean, adding itself is a mode of the mind, but adding is a superpower. I mean, you couldn't engage with me right now if you couldn't add up what I was saying. You couldn't engage with evolutionary theories if you could not add up the whole evolutionary track that we came up along, adding up the states of, how we modified over eons. Okay, that takes adding. We add up the variables of capitalism, we add up the variables of World War II and the Roman Empire, we add up our entire historical page, we add up black history and white history and female history and gay history and the history of boat building, the history of medicine, the history of madness, the history of psychiatry, the history of psychology, the history of mathematics, the history of geniuses. We can engage with all of these things because of the mode of adding. Adding, as I've said many times, it doesn't just come down to adding up your pennies. Okay, you add your way to the airport, you add your way up around the kitchen, you're adding your way up around what I'm saying right now at the time of. You couldn't engage with me without the mode of adding. So adding, in that sense, is a superpower. I mean, the idea that we can add up huge spectrums of knowledge, I mean, to me, that is how I want to be measured. That's part of how I want to be measured as this thing that I am. And I'm not going to say it's a man because I can't predicate man. Anyway, as a thing, as a unit unto himself or herself and so on. So yes, adding. I mean, to engage with me, you have to be able to assemble and disassemble thought. Okay, another mode of the mind, and our ability to assemble, like we couldn't add up the whole evolutionary tract we came up along if we could not assemble and disassemble it. Okay, we're fed myriad thoughts, myriad inferences as we understand, as we delve into the notion of evolution and the track that we have evolved along from fish into chimp into Homo sapien. That's a monumentally huge tract. And the idea we can assemble our minds around it, okay, and disassemble and assemble all the different inferences is another measurement of our ability to see in a systemic manner. And it's a superpower in us. We wouldn't be able to, add up the variables of capitalism and monarchy and all our historical aspects if we did not have the ability to engage with them and disengage from them, add them up, assemble and disassemble them. Okay, so these modes, like I said, we assemble everything, our understanding of history, our understanding of the cell. We assemble and disassemble, we add on, we subtract, we assemble, we disassemble. To build a bridge, you have to assemble the parts, disassemble to understand its structure, its weight structures and so on, all its bearing structures and so on. We have to be able to add them up and assemble and disassemble. To get to Mars, to put a rover on Mars, we had to assemble all the plays at hand and disassemble and add up and subtract and engage and disengage and so on. So the mind was being used in a systemic way, and you are assembling and disassembling, as what I'm saying right now, around all the inferences I'm relaying to you through these signifiers. So that's what language is about. We use signifiers, phonetic signifiers, to align the mind with sets of inferences. So the mind is self-organizes around sets of inferences. And the idea we can organize and optimize and unify more modes of the mind. I mean, where would we be without them? You couldn't concur with me if you couldn't unify what I was saying, if you couldn't optimize and organize around what I was saying, if you couldn't add it up and assemble and disassemble and engage and disengage. To engage and disengage, I mean, I can engage with history, I can engage with medicine, I can engage with chemistry and biology and science and getting to the moon and the idea we evolved and morphed out of monkey. I can engage and disengage from different subjects. Okay, so again, that allows for systemic motion in the mind. So anyway, when you get into all the modes and see them as a constellation set unto themselves in the purest abstract sense, in the purest a priori abstract sense, you can see it as a constellation set, as a single universal set within the heads of all. And whether it's been implied properly is neither here nor there. The fact that it is in us all. I mean, all people add up, all people assemble their day and disassemble it and move forward using these subconscious modes, and they're unaware of them. Unbeknownst to them, all this is going on at a subconscious level. All that we need to concern ourselves with is the fact that it's going on. So we have a systemic lens built in, and it has a set of utility modes that give it systemic agency, and each of these modes are a superpower in their own right. And working in conjunction with one another, they allow our mind to enter all fields of reality. Okay, this is one ring that unites them all. This one seeing eye, doesn't matter what language you speak, Russian or Chinese, English, whatever, this lens is systemic within all, and systemic thought is a universal tongue, if you will. We all square up the circle in the same manner. That's a universal perspective, irrespective of the phonetic sounds that you use to relay that perspective. So to me, we need to delve more into this systemic lens, because if you have to allow for this lens, because you need to use it to debunk me, you'd have to engage the systemic lens. You'd have to evaluate and unify and identify and optimize and add up and assemble and so on to deconstruct what I was saying. So, there's no getting out of the bag, basically. This lens is within all. So given that fact, and like I said, you can't enter science without if you can't evaluate, if you can't categorize another mode of the mind, if you can't navigate another mode of the mind, if you can't assemble and disassemble, if you can't extend and expand more modes of the mind, you cannot enter the field of science. You cannot enter mathematics, you cannot enter geography, you cannot enter any geometrical field of knowledge, you cannot enter medicine without this systemic set of modes being in play. End of story. Now, it is this here's what I want to say to the atheists. It is this exact mode that allows you to debunk God. And what's more, this set is a transcendental set too. It allows us to transcend, it allows us to lift our minds up and transpose our mind into all the inferences that carry all the set perspectives of reality. So this lens is monumentally huge in us. It's almost godlike, isn't it? It's so powerful. This lens is so powerful. When you measure our species in this abstract way, you can see how powerful we actually are, irrespective of all the mistakes we're making out there at the time of flowing. The potential of this lens is monumentally just huge. Now, to me, it is this very lens that we need to be looking at to understand what God might be in the phenomenological sense, because it is this very lens that deconstructs the God delusion. It deconstructs, it pops them, it allows you to pop the delusional bubbles. It allows you to evaluate the God, all the various theories of God that have been put forward. It allows you to add up and subtract. It allows you to assemble it and disassemble it. It allows you to deconstruct it and so on. So you're using this lens to take God out of the picture. You're using this lens to bring science into the picture in the correct manner and so on. But this lens, when it actually goes down the rabbit hole after man and woman, okay, it cannot predicate them. This exact lens that you use for every other subject to arrive at knowledge, to the symmetry of knowledge in the correct manner, this same lens is the lens that debunks the notion of man, because man has no first order predicate. Man therefore cannot be premised. Okay, man is on a path, a continuous path from conception to death, and there's no time, there's no place on that developmental ladder, that developmental path, where we can just pinpoint and stop it in time and say, there is man. Man is in a dissipating suit. Man is dissipating as a body. It just dissipates, okay? It persists on the back of a greater order, and I believe the greater order to be this mind, consciousness itself. Another story, and I'm always going to be getting to it. But it is this lens, just to compound it once more, it is this lens that takes man out of the picture, the man delusion. So, okay, so until we can answer, this question, or this perspective, until we can give light to it and understand and come to terms with what it is within us, the God story is still alive, because I believe this is consciousness coming back to life in us. I believe evolution is total resurrection, that this God, this ghostly thing within us, is a systemic observational eye, and it's starting to rise and come back to life, and it's starting to pop its head up at long last in this monkey suit. So yes, anyway, so like I said, we have we're on page 2 now. We're on page 2 now of the God story. What is God? And if you want to understand it, you have to get into the phenomenological lens, as I said, because only by going in there can you understand the true scope and scale of what we are. So I'll leave it on that note. Thanks for tuning in. Peace and love and logic.